Assuming that you're familiar with the chords in the first section, let's push on and look at some very neat variations. The guitar is often thought of as a little orchestra with 6 members, the 6 strings. And one of the principles of orchestration is that you have some players play and some players not play. And by changing those around, you get different colors. So I tend to think in terms of chords on the guitar based on string sets. Think about it. All the chords that we did in the first section were based on strings 2, 3, and 4 with a root on either the 5th or the 6th string. By adding or subtracting notes to this basic orchestration, we can come up with some really nice variations. One that we're going to do now is to use only strings 6, 4, and 3. These are the chord shapes that were used by guitarists like Freddie Green to play the rhythm chords in the swing bands. Now notice that to start off, all I have to do is take my C major 7 chord and simply omit, remember to mute, the note on the 2nd string. So we end up with this 3-note chord voiced root, major 7, 3rd. Again, apply your laws of theory, flat the 7th, major 7 to the flat 7th, and we end up with a C dominant 7 chord. If we lower the 7th another half step, we end up with a C major 6 chord, which is a really nice sounding chord for this style. When playing the C minor 7 chord, you should also be aware that this chord will work very nicely for the C half diminished, the minor 7 flat 5, because there's no 5th to flat. This chord will work for both of them. Similarly, this C minor 6 chord will also work for C diminished 7th, again, because there's no 5th to flat. These chord shapes and some other neat chord shapes from this area you can find on page 4 of the booklet. Now when we go down to the 5th string root, it's a little bit trickier because what we're going to do is we're not going to play the root, we're going to play the 5th in the bass. This takes a little bit of getting used to, but it shouldn't be too bad. Start off with the C dominant 9 chord, which I hope you remember from the first section, and do 2 things. First of all, get rid of the note on the 2nd string, and then move the note on the 5th string from the root over to the 5th on the 6th string. So we end up with a C7 chord voiced 5th, 3rd, flat 7. That's right, there is no C in this C7 chord. This is called an assumed root. Remember, we're playing these in an ensemble, and the bass player will cover the C. Now, whenever there is an assumed root in a chord, I'm going to mark it on your chord sheet, and it's going to have the root, but it's going to have an X through it, so that you can keep track of where your roots are. Once again, we can apply the laws of theory and easily get variations. So for instance, if we take this chord and lower the 3rd, the note on the 4th string half step, we end up with a C minor 7 chord. Or we could have taken the flat 7 on the 3rd string and raised it a half step to the major 7 and end up with a major 7 chord. These chord shapes and some other neat chord shapes from this particular position you can find on page 5 of your booklet. Now, moving back up to the 8th fret area, this time we're going to do a bunch of voicings that are based on adding notes. You may notice at this point we haven't done anything with our top string. Why don't we? We're going to start off with the C minor 7 chord. And what we're going to do is we're going to move the root from the low E string all the way up to the high E string. Now, obviously, with all these notes on the same fret, we need to play our bar. Let's see what we've got. We have a flat 7, a minor 3rd, a 5th, and a root. And while this is an okay chord, it's more interesting to move the root up again to the 9th. So we have a C minor 9th chord. And again, there's no C in this chord. The C is actually this root, which you'll see indicated with that X on your chord sheet. Applying the laws of theory, we can create some very neat variations. For instance, if we take our minor 3rd and raise it a half step on the 3rd string, we end up with a C dominant 9th. And if we then take our flat 7 and raise it up to the major 7, we end up with a major 9 chord. These chord shapes and some other neat shapes from this particular position you can find on page 6 of your chord booklet. Now let's move back down to the 3rd position area again. Remember the C9 chord? Some of you funk guys were wondering why I didn't put the G on top. Well, you can go ahead and do that now. It's okay if you want to keep playing the root here, but at the same time you might want to practice not playing the root because you really don't need it. So if you do, you end up with a C9 chord voiced 3rd, flat 7, 9, and 5. Again, applying laws of theory, if we take our major 3rd and lower it a half step, we end up with a C minor 9 chord. Or, keeping the major 3rd, we could have lowered the 7th to the 6th, for a C major 6/9 chord, which is a slightly different version of a major 7th chord. These chord shapes and other really neat chord shapes you can find on page 7 of your booklet. Let me give you a couple of basic pieces of advice for playing jazz chords on the guitar. First of all, once you've found a particular orchestration that works, you pretty much want to stick with it. You don't want to be jumping around between high and low voiced chords. You want to confine most of your chord voicings to between the 3rd and the 10th fret. This middle area of the fingerboard is where most of the action is going to happen. You also want to look at making the movements between the chords as smooth as possible. And what you're going to find is that 6th-string root chords tend to go to 5th-string root chords and back again. For instance, if we're doing a chord progression that went D minor 7 to G7 or G13 to C major 7, you notice there's a huge shift there. You'd have been better off going D minor 7, G9, C major 7, or D minor 9, G13, C major 7. Get in the habit of using the smallest physical movements to connect the chords possible. This does two things. It's a lot less work and you're more likely to get the chords. It also results in smooth voice leading, the idea that each chord is reined together in a very, very smooth way, which musically is a really, really nice sound. Hopefully these tips will inspire you and excite you to get into the really wonderful world of jazz guitar chording.